Three problems had developed in Major League Baseball during the first half of the 1950s. First, there was competitive imbalance. The New York Yankees won the World Series 6 times between 1949 and 1956, and the years they did not win, either the Brooklyn Dodgers or the New York Giants did. Second, where you could see big league ball remained clustered in a handful of northern industrial cities despite large urban markets elsewhere that wanted the game. Third, owners forfeited crucial opportunities to make Major League Baseball a once-a-week viewing habit across the nation. By contrast, the upstart National Football League was not so short-sighted. It was competitive, bicoastal, and televised. Let's talk about why problems in baseball during the 1950s explain the NFL's meteoric rise in popularity during the 1960s. It's true that the 1950s was a golden age for baseball in the sense that the sport had never been more popular. Kids played it across the country and collected trading cards of their heroes. The musical Damn Yankees was a smash hit on Broadway and inspired a motion picture. Yet, the real golden age of baseball was in New York City. That was where you could see the game's three best center fielders, Mickey Mantle, Duke Snider, and Willie Mays. Fans debated who was the best. Was it Mickey, the Duke, or Willie? Roy Campanella and Yogi Berra, two of the greatest catchers of all time, played in New York. There are other incredible players worth mentioning, but the point is this. New York teams were exciting. They had crosstown rivalries, and they had stars. Meanwhile, fans of the Chicago Cubs, Pittsburgh Pirates, and St. Louis Browns could expect their teams to lose 60 to 70% of their games. Here you see the two best and two worst Major League records from 1951 to 1956. Even though the Cleveland Indians won the pennant in 1954, they still lost the World Series to the Giants. Why? Why had this become the state of affairs? Well, first, teams in large markets like New York had more money. Second, the Dodgers, Indians, and Giants were among the first to sign talented African Americans after 1946, and that decision paid off. Integrated teams were often the winning teams. But the main reason had to do with the lack of any equitable system of drafting players out of high school or college. Richer clubs could simply hire more scouts and offer bigger bonuses to prospects. What baseball needed was a first-year draft of amateur players like the NFL, with higher picks going to less competitive teams, or a system of revenue sharing between richer and poorer teams. Successful franchises like the Yankees viewed any such arrangement as communism. Why give up our market advantage in pursuit of collective success? In contrast, the fledgling NFL wasn't afraid of using a little communism to achieve its goals. Its franchises shared revenue, which helped the poorer teams survive and compete. New York's dominance was great for New York, but it meant fans in other large cities like Philadelphia and Chicago didn't expect their teams to reach the postseason. Attendance dropped dramatically in some markets. For example, fewer than 300,000 fans showed up to see the St. Louis Browns and Boston Braves in the years before they appropriately relocated to Baltimore and Milwaukee. By contrast, the Yankees consistently drew over 1.5 million spectators. Let's talk about how the game was played in the 1950s. Well, there was plenty of power. Home runs occurred often, and fans like home runs. But something else started to happen. The number of strikeouts started to rise sharply. And it's been said many times that fans want the ball in play, not batters striking out. Well, in the late 60s, the league did change the rules to help batters, but the league was slow to act on this issue. Base stealing in the 1950s had become something of a novelty, a rare occurrence. Sure, speedy players like Willie Mays or Jackie Robinson existed, but stealing bases had reached a historic low point. The 1955 Baltimore Orioles stole just 33 bases. That amounts to one stolen base for every 5 games. Well, more strikeouts and slower players contributed to the lengthening of average game times from 2 to 2.5 hours. Keep in mind, this was an era before managers would make 5 pitching changes per game. And again, owners and league executives did not see any reason to speed things up or implement rule changes. Let's talk about where people could see Major League Baseball. Until 1958, it was something in the northern industrial cities, even though Los Angeles, Houston, San Francisco, Dallas, San Diego, and Seattle all had sizable populations. Long before 1950, the Los Angeles Angels and San Francisco Seals of the Pacific Coast League had large stadiums and fan bases. Here are Major League Baseball's 13 cities in 1957, and here are the NFL's 11 cities. With 2 franchises in California, professional football had more of a national reach. By 1977, Major League Baseball had expanded to Texas, Canada, Washington State, and Georgia, but the NFL remained ahead of the curve with franchises in Colorado, Louisiana, and Florida. Where you could see pro football consistently outpaced where you could see Major League Baseball. Public polling shows that Americans began to identify football as their favorite game to watch on television by the 1960s, mid-1960s. We might be tempted to assume that television doesn't capture baseball especially well, but I would argue a different point. Professional football embraced the new medium. In 1950, the Los Angeles Rams and Washington Redskins of the NFL had all of their games televised. They wanted their teams to be televised. Here you see Colts quarterback Johnny Unitas. In 1958, NBC broadcast the NFL's championship game, and 45 million Americans tuned in to see Unitas lead his team to victory in what has been called the game of the century. This event sparked a noticeable rise in the NFL's popularity. Meanwhile, few pro baseball teams were interested in ABC's idea of a game of the week in 1953. And when the game of the week idea did get going, the league's owners insisted on a viewing blackout for anyone within 50 miles of the 2 featured franchises. Much like the initial resistance to radio, baseball's owners adhered to a false assumption that if people could occasionally watch their local team on television, they would not show up to the ballpark and buy tickets. Owners could not appreciate the value of a weekly game to showcase star players and burnish the game's national appeal. Looking back to 1950, it's clear executives did not understand the urgency of expanding to new cities, addressing the game's appeal to spectators, or consolidating its place on television. Pro football set itself up for long-term success in the 1950s, while pro baseball remained highly traditional in outlook. In many respects, the 1950s was baseball's worst decade. If you watched this video, let me know what you think in the comments, and thanks for watching.